Thank you, everyone. We're live. I'll turn it over to you, Wanda.
Thank you, Jessica. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. And I am Wanda Watson. I'm the lead community liaison for the consent decree monitoring team. And I've had this position now for a little, well, since July 1. And it is most enlightening about the consent decree. There's so many pieces to it. And one of the things that we're going to try to do with these evening forums that we have quarterly is to let the community ask questions. There's no question that is not acceptable. We want you to be educated and engaged in this process. So I'm going to just turn it over now to Miller Roberts, who is my partner in crime, and he's going to tell you about himself, as well as we're going to introduce the other people who are going to be on the panel this evening. Take it, Miller.
Thank you, Ms. Wanda, and good evening, everyone. My name is Miller Roberts, and as Ms. Wanda mentioned, I've stepped into the role of the Community Engagement Coordinator for the monitoring team. Tonight, you're going to hear a lot of encouraging updates about the progress made with the consent decree. However, we only have 1 hour, and there's a lot of other information that you should have, as Ms. Wanda mentioned. And I hope that you will reach out to the monitoring team, to all of the neighborhood liaisons, so that we can schedule time to speak with you, give you the additional information, meet with your communities, your faith-based institutions, or if it's just a group of concerned citizens on the corner, we're happy to connect with you. Please send us an email or visit our website and fill out the form, and we will be back in touch with you so that we can further the conversation. Ms. Wanda, back to you.
Thank you. And tonight, what you can do is ask your questions inside of the Facebook comment section, and Miller will be able to pull those up and ask our team, Ken Thompson, who is our lead monitor, as well as Seth Rosenthal, who is our deputy monitor. And we're waiting for one other person to come on, Chuck Ramsey, and you may have seen him on CNN. Every time I look up, I see him there. Oh,
I'm on.
He's on. Great, Chuck. And so now, Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you all can take it away.
Well, thank you, Wanda. Thank you, Miller. You guys, both of you, are great additions to the team, and I'm enjoying working with you. And let me welcome everyone tonight. As Wanda indicated, or as Miller indicated, we only have an hour, so I'm not going to take up too much time discussing too many issues right now, because I'm hoping we'll get questions. But let me say just a few things. The monitoring team has spent the last 3 years working with the DOJ and helping the BPD revise its policies and come up with new and better training techniques. And we're now at a point where we are comfortable that the foundational requirements of the consent decree have pretty much been met. So we're now going into what many will say is the most difficult stage, but we're now at the point where we need to begin assessing the department and how it's doing based on data. You know, we've had some what we call anecdotal evidence that the department is doing well in some areas, very well in some areas, not so well in others, but it's time for us to utilize the data that we are now beginning to assemble. And so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that, at least from my end, because I have Seth Rosenthal, who is one of the deputies on the team, who's actually spearheading the assessment effort. So I'm going to turn it over to Seth to discuss a little bit about the outcome assessments and the compliance reviews that we will be doing. We're actually already doing it. And these are going to be the tools that we will use to figure out just where BPD and in the city to some extent where they are along the continuum to reform. So Seth, I'll turn it over to you. You're on mute.
Figure after 18 months, I would get that right, finally. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Wanda and Miller. So as Ken said, the monitoring team is really turning its attention now to the assessment part of the consent decree reform process. Last year, in connection with the publication of our 2.5-year retrospective look back or assessment of BPD's progress so far, we published our first comprehensive review, which was of Public Integrity Bureau or internal affairs investigations and the quality of those investigations from the year 2018, which was really before the reform process got up and running in earnest, at least within the internal affairs function of the BPD. And so we published that first compliance review again last September, and we've begun to publish a series of assessments this year. So at the very beginning of the year, we took a look at use of force statistics. It was not a qualitative review of use of force incidents or use of force reporting, but rather just a quantitative review of use of force incidents from 2017, 2018, and 2019. I'm sorry, 2017, 2018, and 2019, to take a look at whether there were any trends that we might be able to latch onto, with 2017 being prior to the consent decree, 2018 being the first full year of the consent decree where some of the use of force policies were being written, and then 2019 being the year that the use of force training was actually done. We are going to be supplementing that particular quantitative assessment with a qualitative review of BPD use of force spanning the years 2018 to 2020. And what we're taking a look at, what we're doing there, and this is underway now. We finished about a quarter of that analysis so far, but we're taking a look at a statistically significant random sample of use of force cases, from the least serious or level 1 use of force cases to the most serious, level 3, or including shootings, for whether the force used was consistent with consent decree and constitutional standards, whether it was reasonable, necessary, reasonable, and proportional, whether the reporting was adequate, and whether supervisory review of the use of force was adequate. And we're doing that in dozens and dozens of cases, and we hope to publish our report on use of force early next year, either late this year or early next year. So that's one area where we're really concentrating on. And one of the reasons we're concentrating on it is because in Department of Justice's investigation of BPD, one of the areas where DOJ found a pattern or practice of unconstitutional behavior was in the area of use of force. And so it's one of the areas that we're focusing on up front. Another assessment that we have recently published, we published just a couple of months ago, an assessment of BPD responses to calls for service, essentially to shine a light on whether response times for calls for service have been improving and whether they're being handled effectively. So we put out that report. Right now, in addition to those that we've already published, we're doing additional assessments. We're beginning to develop methodology on assessing the efficacy of BPD's sex assault investigations. We're also going to come back to internal affairs investigations because it's such a critical part of the reform process. And we're going to be doing a spot check of a randomly selected number of internal affairs investigations from 2019 and 2020 to determine whether there's been any improvement since our comprehensive assessment 2018. We're also going to be looking quantitatively at misconduct complaints to see whether there are any trends over the last few years that we might be able to detect, in conjunction with our qualitative spot check of in internal investigations to see if there's been improvement in the internal affairs function. We're also going to be taking a look at arrests made by BPD officers in the years 2018, 2019, and 2020 to determine whether, generally speaking, arrests are being made consistent with constitutional standards. BPD has been doing some of that work on its own. We're going to be looking behind BPD's work to determine whether the audit unit in BPD is taking a look at those particular arrests the right way. And then we're going to be doing our own assessment of a random sample of BPD arrests over those years to determine whether from body worn camera footage and reports, BPD appears to be generally complying with consent decree and constitutional standards. So that just gives you an idea of the type of work that is underway and the type of work that is in the pipeline in the assessments arena. We are going to ultimately be covering every area under the consent decree, but that just gives you an example of some of the things that are underway now. Ken, I don't know, or Chuck, I don't know if you've got anything to add to what we're doing in the assessments arena before we open it up to questions.
No, unless Chuck has.
No, I don't. I think right now the use of force assessment is the most important thing right now that we're focused on. I'm part of that review of cases. I probably have reviewed about 16 or 17 already. And I know there's plenty more to come, so.
Okay, Wanda, open it up for questions.
Okay, Miller, did you have anyone?
I do, and I'm happy to get started. So the first question that I have posted is there's a question asking what is being done to counteract what GTTF has done? And I think they're
That's a good
speaking
question.
of the damage and mistrust that has come out of GTTF.
I'll get started and I'll let Chuck and Seth follow up. I think the gun trace task force was obviously a disaster, but it really was just a disaster that compounded earlier disasters. There was a lack of trust between the community and the police department long before the gun trace task force came around. And in fact, I would say that what the gun trace task force did, if anything, it simply proved to a lot of folks who've been around for 20, 30, 40 years that what they thought about the police, unfortunately, was true. So the consent decree from its genesis, from its beginning, was designed to do a number of things, but one of the most important things was to help rebuild that trust between, or help build trust between the community and the police department. And one of the areas that we looked at and that the consent decree spends a lot of time focusing on is police accountability. So to answer the question directly, I think what we see is a strong effort to reform what's now called PIB, or the Public Integrity Bureau. This is the internal affairs division of the police department. This is the division that is assigned the task of investigating police officers. So a lot of time has been spent and a lot of time continues to be spent in trying to rebuild that particular unit so that policemen, when they cross the line and do bad things or violate policies, will be held accountable, so you don't have another gun trace task force. The other thing I will say, and then I'll let somebody else talk. We now have some really, really good leadership in this department. And Chuck will know this better than anybody else, but in my view, in the police department, you know, the culture of that department in many ways is dictated by who's at the top and how that person, how he or she runs the department. I think in Commissioner Harrison, we have a very strong, reform-minded police chief who really doesn't put up with a lot of nonsense. And he has taken a number of steps to make certain that those officers who can't abide by the law are dealt with either in terms of administrative hearings, and those who commit crimes are referred to the state's attorney's office for prosecution.
If I can just kind of build on that just a little bit, you mentioned Commissioner Harrison, who is considered to be one of the top police chiefs in the country, but he came from New Orleans, and he had very similar problems down there with corruption, with officers engaging in unethical behavior. He actually created a program called EPIC, Ethical Policing is Courageous, that officers are trained on. And that is, you know, if they see something occurring, another officer is involved in something, you know, stepping forward and taking some action or bringing it to the attention of superiors is what's expected. That training is being given to Baltimore officers now. It's actually training that's being given around the country in various departments. There's a new one called ABLE that really is a spinoff of the one that Harrison created. So, you know, Ken is absolutely right. That is a part of the dark history of this department. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it does start with leadership at the top. And you're very fortunate here in Baltimore to have a very, very good, solid leader who's going to turn this around, no question about it.
Let me ask you a question. While we're talking about the Public Integrity Bureau, there was an incident recently where two officers were indicted. Tell us how that occurred and how that was integrated into our new services by the Public Integrity Bureau.
I'll start and I'll let Seth or Chuck follow up. You know, that it's not only that event, but if you read the newspaper this evening, there's another police officer who has been indicted for theft, essentially for allegedly stealing time. What I look at is this department now is vigorously reviewing officers' conduct and misconduct. And so when you look at the case that you mentioned, Ms. Wanda, this case was actually discovered well over a year ago by the Public Integrity Bureau, and it was referred almost immediately to the state's attorney's office for investigation. And of course, the state's attorney's office, I mean, they've got a lot of work to do. They have a lot of cases. It took them, I think, well over a year to come to a final conclusion, but they ultimately indicted the police officer who was charged with excessive force. But the point is that I think you now have a department that is very seriously looking at these kinds of activities. And it's not the first time that this department and this police commissioner has referred a case to the state's attorney's office where either the commissioner himself or someone in the Public Integrity Bureau believed that crimes had been committed. So unlike what may have happened 10, 15 years ago when these cases were kind of allowed to get a free pass, and that's one of the reasons why, in my view, you had the genesis of the Gun Trace Task Force. We're now seeing, police officers who are violating policy, who are crossing the line, and who are alleged to have committed crimes. I mean, this commissioner and this department is not tolerating it. They're sending it directly to the state's attorney's office for review, investigation, and if called for, prosecution.
And that's part of the painful process of turning a department around, holding people accountable. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, and it's going to be a period of time when you're going to see more of that sort of thing where officers may be indicted or fired or whatever for misconduct. But that's part of the process you go through in turning a department around. You have to hold people accountable. Not everything's going to be criminal in nature, but it'll still be held accountable. It may be a heavy suspension, it might be termination, but people need to be held accountable. And it is a painful process, believe me, I've gone through it. And but it's necessary to clean the department up. You've got to get rid of the bad apples.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I've been talking to people about is the fact that our Public Integrity Department has actually just received training professional training that had not happened before. And there are trainings happening in the surrounding counties as well. And I've noticed there are a significant number of arrests recently. And I'm wondering if that is attributable to the fact that they have been trained differently.
Seth or Chuck?
I think it's probably too early to tell that, Ms. Wanda, because the training of Public Integrity Bureau investigators just wrapped up in April. And so to take, for instance, the two cases that Ken and you just mentioned, those were referrals that were made a year ago, right? And it took the state's attorney's office quite a while to investigate and ultimately charge those cases. So that was work that was already underway, but it is a fact that in order for the Public Integrity Bureau really to take the next step and for its detectives to do what they are supposed to be doing, the training that they just received is absolutely essential. Public Integrity Bureau investigators, believe it or not, had never been specifically trained in how to conduct police misconduct investigations. That hadn't happened. They had simply, officers had simply gone to the Public Integrity Bureau and were asked to do investigations without doing any training, without undergoing any training. And so now they've had specialized training in conducting internal investigations, and we're hopeful that that training will produce results, that the investigations will be of higher quality and more thorough, that the findings made by the Public Integrity Bureau will be more well-reasoned and more well justified, and that the ultimate outcomes, whether it leads to discipline or not, are more defensible.
Okay. Miller, did you have any more questions?
Let me add.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to add one. when you mentioned training, one of the things that we need to appreciate is that not only was this training the first time for Baltimore City internal affairs investigators, but you know, in many departments around the state, they'd never had that training. And so, just as a matter of fact, this training program actually had detectives in from other counties who came in to sit in, and they wanted to be trained alongside of Baltimore City police officers. So I think, you know, those of us who live in the city, you know, we really need to look at some of the advances that this department is making. I mean, this department, quite frankly, in spite of, you know, the naysayers around here, is really working very hard to be on the front edge, to be on the front end or the front line of reform. And so, you know, the training program that they put in with respect to the Public Integrity Bureau obviously has been respected by other police departments, and that's why they've sent their people to be trained alongside Baltimore City detectives.
Great. Miller, you have the questions from the audience?
Sure. I have a question that was emailed in before the show. And the question comments that they understand that community policing is a big part of what the consent decree is going to improve and roll out. However, they do not feel like it has been implemented in their community. And how do they learn more about what the community policing plan will produce for their community and how they can be active with that plan?
Well,
Chuck?
I mean, it hasn't been fully implemented. The officers are undergoing training now. The plan was approved some months ago. The training is taking place now for the officers. So it's still in the process of officers being properly trained to fully understand their new role and responsibilities as it relates to community policing. So yeah, the person is absolutely right if they haven't actually seen it in action, but it's getting there, and they've made progress. They're actually having regular classes now. You know, COVID did slow things down a little bit, but they've gotten back into the training regiment that they need to have in order to be successful and to get this really off the ground. It's an important aspect of policing. I'm a huge believer in community policing, implemented it in 3 different police departments. It really does make a difference. And a lot of people think that, you know, community policing and crime fighting aren't compatible, and they are very compatible. Yeah. You know, you can engage in community policing and be very effective in dealing with crime problems at the same time. And again, community policing is consistent, is constitutional policing. And so all those things come together and all those things work together. You know, be a little patient, give it some time. The department could do a better job of getting information out about the community policing and about community engagement. We've had conversations about that as well. So they've got to do a better job of getting the message out.
Piggybacking on that, let me ask you, what does community policing look like? What should our community expect to see?
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
They should see a much higher level of engagement. They should see actual partnerships. They should see problem solving. They should see all those kinds of things taking place where you work on problems that are of concern to the community, crime and disorder problems that many of them are deeply entrenched, that, you know, require not only police, but require other city agencies, require cooperation with nonprofits, with community organizations, all those kinds of things being brought together to focus on the issues that, mostly underlying issues that really lead to the crime and disorder types of problems. You know, even things as like getting vacant lots cleaned up that are being used to stash drugs or guns or what have you, and just to blight the entire neighborhood. I mean, that's all part of it too. I mean, it's really improving the quality of life, and at the same time, making things safe. I like to think of it more, instead of public safety, more of community safety, because there are so many different aspects of community safety that need to be taken into account, you know. And now we're talking and policing about, you know, the police need to be first responders for everything. Well, they don't need to be. Some cases, yes, others don't. So do you partner now with another city agency if it's a mental health or it's a substance abuse or homelessness issues? I mean, that's all part of community policing. You know, here's the problem. Now, who's best suited to help resolve it? In some cases, police could be the primary. Other times you're just playing a secondary role. Other agencies are involved, community organizations. How do you sustain it long-term once the problem has been resolved? That falls on the community to sustain it long-term. Helping to educate people as to how to make that happen. Organize, block captains, all those kinds of things. That's all part of a community policing philosophy, bringing everybody together collectively to deal with problems.
Okay, any other questions, Miller? Nope.
I don't
Okay,
have any more at the moment.
okay. So now, one of the things that we need to actually tell the community, I get this question all the time. When is the consent decree going to be over? When are we going to be done with this? Police ask me the same thing. And my pat answer is always, when we get it right. That's, I don't know if anybody wants to say anything other, but for me, that sums it up. We have to get this right. And I tell people that the nation is watching us. And
Seth,
so,
Crack at that?
go ahead.
No, I said, Seth, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure, thanks, Ken. As Ken said at the outset, the police department, BPD, is much of the way through the foundational reforms, policies, training, crafting plans, and beginning the implementation of those plans. They now need to meet certain benchmarks to determine whether in each area of the consent decree, they're achieving the reforms that the consent decree envisions. That's going to take some time because it's going to take some time for us to assess where they're headed, right? And they are, BPD is just coming online or will just be coming online with certain data that for 4 years has been unavailable to us. So data, for instance, in the area of investigative stops. We haven't had access to data on investigative stops since we started this. BPD's violation or alleged violation of individuals' constitutional rights when they're stopping, frisking, and searching people is one of the reasons why BPD is under a consent decree. And we've not been able to meaningfully measure that yet because BPD has been in the dark ages when it comes to keeping that type of information. They are now just rolling out a new record management system that will enable officers to record that information in real time in a centralized database that will make it much easier for BPD itself and for us to examine that data and determine the extent to which BPD is complying with the consent decree and the Constitution. But again, we don't really have any data to speak of right now, and it's going to take several years before we're comfortable with the amount of data that we have to analyze before we're able to determine that BPD has reached compliance with the consent decree in the area of, for instance, investigative stops. So as Wanda said, we can't, and we wish we could, but we can't put an exact date on it. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the court to decide. But I think it's safe to say that it's going to be a few more years before we've reached the point of determining whether BPD is fully in compliance with each and every one of the hundreds of paragraphs in the consent decree.
Okay, Miller, did you have a question from the audience? No? Let's see, there
Yeah,
was.
Ms.
Go ahead.
Wanda, let me add this on top of what Seth said. I think, and the community has every right to be impatient because, and I live in the city, so I consider myself to be a community member. We've been waiting for decades, to have a good police department that we could trust and that we felt was looking out for everyone's interest. But the thing we all have to keep in mind, we want long-term sustainable change. We don't want to put a Band-Aid on a situation and 2 years or 3 years after the monitoring team is gone and the federal judge is no longer
Right.
doing this, that the department goes back to the bad habits that it had in the early days. So, speed, while we would all like this to be done yesterday, the reality is that for anything to have sustainable change, you've got to take your time. You've got to do this thing in a very deliberate way so that you don't leave any stones unturned. You don't go through any shortcuts. You make sure that all of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted so that this department will consist of the right men and women who are out here who have taken an oath to protect and serve. So, you know, as much as we would love this to go fast, I think fast speed in this case is not bad. What is most important is that it be done right.
Okay. Anyone else have anything to offer? Chuck?
Well, I mean, I think it's also important to note that once they do come into what would be considered substantial compliance with different provisions, they have to maintain that over a period of time. And so then we have to monitor to make sure that, you know, it's not just a check the box exercise. I mean, it has to actually be something that's in place that is sustained for a period of time to a point where the monitoring team, the Department of Justice, can tell the court that ultimately is going to make the final decision that the department is in compliance, full compliance with the provisions of the consent decree. But you have to monitor that. So getting there is one thing, staying there is another.
Okay.
And so we have to make sure that once they reach that level, they sustain it. So we don't have to come back.
One of the things that warmed my heart was recently that the mayor rolled out the mental and emotionally challenged new initiative where there are people who can be reached through 911 or the fire department, versus sending out a police officer. They will send out a trained mental health professional.
Right.
Could someone elaborate on that? That warmed my heart. That was like one of my dream comes true.
Yeah, so that started last month, Wanda, and it's what's called a 911 diversion pilot. And what BPD, well, the 911 center gets about 13,000 behavioral health related calls a year. And roughly 10% of those are people who have suicidal ideation, meaning that, you know, they're at risk of suicide, but they present no threat of violence to anybody else and have not taken active steps to harm themselves yet. The idea is that for those calls, Behavioral Community Resources, Inc., which is the city's partner, will be monitoring the 911 line 24 hours a day. And the idea is that 911 call takers and dispatchers will take a look at those types of calls where individuals are not a threat of violence and have not taken active steps to harm themselves with weapons, and try to divert those to BCRI caseworkers so that they can respond to the calls themselves. There may be other situations where the response calls for a sort of a co-response. I mean, response is a co-response, meaning that you have both a police officer and a behavioral health professional responding with the idea of de-escalating the person experiencing crisis. And then there are going to be some calls where a person experiencing behavioral health crisis either has engaged in an act of violence or is a serious threat of engaging in an act of violence, and there's no getting around the need for a police response in those. But with respect to the 911 diversion pilot, that is underway, and we're looking forward to seeing the results.
Good, thank you. Anybody else?
No, go ahead, Chuck.
No, I wasn't. No, I think he summed it up very well.
I was going to add one thing, and I think this is the beauty of the consent decree. When the consent decree was designed, I mean, a lot of these issues that we're seeing now, while they've certainly been around, they were not hot button items back in 2017, at least not from my perspective. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I tend to think that this consent decree was quite forward looking. And I think there was a recognition, you know, back in the days when it was being developed, which started in, I guess, late 2015 into 2016. There was the thought that, and Chuck has alluded to this, that, you know, police should not be called for every single thing that goes on in a city. Unfortunately, you know, police are always the first responders because that's the first thing people think of anytime they have any kind of crisis. But this consent decree actually was very forward looking in 2015, 2016, 2017, and recognized that there are certain cases when you're dealing with homeless people or folks who have a behavioral crisis that that an entity other than a police department or a police person should be sent to the scene. So I would say that the consent decree was well designed from the beginning, and we're now beginning to see some of the early fruits of that. And as Seth indicated, we'll watch this pilot very carefully. I'm like you, Ms. Wanda. I really am looking forward to hopefully a good result, because we're looking at 13,000 calls a year out of 800,000 calls for service. So it's not a large percentage of the calls for service, but it's still 13,000 calls. That's a lot of calls. And of that number, we've got to make sure that whatever support the police need or whatever support the mental health community needs to provide, it needs to be there. And so, this goes way beyond policemen. This goes really to the city and the state and maybe even the nation, making sure there are adequate funds to provide the kind of mental health services that people in this city and around the country need.
And I think is one other thing too, we're talking about 13,000, but that's 13,000 calls where the issue is related to mental health. A lot of times a call comes in as a disturbance or something else. And it's not until the police officer gets there that you see that a person is going through some kind of mental health crisis. And it's not necessarily then classified as that being the issue. And so there are a lot of calls that come out that really, people don't call 911 to say good morning. They call because there is a crisis of some kind. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's a person who has any kind of mental health issue. But at that emotional time, you still have to engage in de-escalation. You still have to do things to try to resolve it peacefully, because there's an elevated, emotions that are present too. So, there's a lot that goes into this, but, I'm very, very glad to see that Baltimore is taking that step. I think it's a step that has to be taken. Not every call requires a police officer to respond. They're professionals, far better trained and in a much better position to be able to handle that. And it'll take time before you're able to evaluate it to see what difference and what changes it's really made. But at least they're on the right path moving in that direction. And if I could just add quickly around community policing, because I see that connect the dots with all this stuff, because that is part of it. It's resolving a problem. And as I said before, not necessarily police that need to resolve it. Others can be involved in that as well. But there's two other issues that I didn't mention when that original question that Miller raised from the email. One is right now the department is, short-staffed, and community policing does require the department to have full staffing, because a big part of community policing is continuity of assignment, having the same officers assigned to the same areas on a consistent basis. Not just a district, but a geographical subdivision of that district, so that in your area, who is your police officer? You know them by name. You know who they are, right, and they know who you are. That's a big part of it. It's not just a revolving door of whoever is driving down the street at the moment. There are people who actually have responsibility for that geographical area, and that's your go-to person. And that's why staffing is so important. The department is aggressively trying to correct that recruiting. But again, when you think about the time it takes for an officer to go through the academy, be on the street, right, you don't see that overnight.
Absolutely. And
the 40% rule as well, because that plays a part of that.
Right.
And I know that's how it was when I grew up. I'm not going to say how long ago that was, but we knew the police officers in our, who patrolled our block. And I think that that's going to be a good thing for us, again, to do that. Before we go, I'd like to touch a little bit on youth diversion, because one of the things here in Baltimore City is we have always arrested our youth and given them a record. So then they can't get a job. So is part of this consent decree going to help us with that?
Seth?
The shorter answer is yes. There's a brief section of the consent decree that does address youth diversion. About a year and a half ago, the city and BPD hired an outside independent consulting firm to conduct a analysis of the city's various youth diversion programs, where the gaps are, and made recommendations for how the city could plug those gaps. And so now this is where the rubber meets the road. You know, the city and BPD have to seek to implement the recommendations in that analysis. And both the mayor's office and BPD are now at work trying to implement some of the recommendations in that analysis. I would commend to everybody who's watching that particular report. It's very well done, it's thorough, and it's on BPD's transparency website. I forget candidly if it's on our website too, but it is the blueprint for implementing the youth diversion directives within the consent decree. But you're absolutely right, Wanda. One of the overarching objectives of the consent decree is to stanch the school to prison pipeline, and to make sure that youth who might otherwise get involved in the juvenile or criminal justice systems are diverted where appropriate away from those systems and to community resources where they can find support and where they can move forward in their lives, hopefully without the kind of scarlet letter that you were just referring to.
All right. Any other thoughts, Miller? Miller?
Oh, I was just going to say the next question if we don't have any comments on that. There's a question asking what kind of support is the monitoring team getting from the mayor's office?
I'll start. I think from day one, the approach has been a collaborative one. The monitoring team has gotten tremendous cooperation from the Department of Justice, from the Baltimore Police Department, and from the City of Baltimore. That's not to say that we always agree on, you know, what needs to be done or what should be done, but I would say that overall, since the monitoring team has come on board, we have received quite good cooperation from all of the parties. And I'm told, because I don't work in other cities, I concentrate pretty much in Baltimore, but I'm told by folks on my team who worked in other towns that Baltimore is somewhat unique in the sense that we seem to thrive in a very cooperative environment. And I think that's a good thing because everyone is looking to improve the department, and that means the city is doing what it needs to do. Again, you know, we don't always agree, and you can't expect that, but I would say overall, the monitoring team has gotten good support from the city, and it holds true now with Mayor Brandon Scott. I mean, he steps up to the plate when we need things to be done. The city does its best to get it done.
Great. One of our neighborhood liaisons had a question from one of his neighbors. Can we anticipate a large-scale update to city residents on the achievements to date of the consent decree? Is the question. I think we've touched on it a bit, but you may want to elaborate a little.
Yes,
Let me start. I mean, the bottom line is every 6 months, we provide a comprehensive update to the community on the progress that we believe BPD is making and how much further BPD has to go. We published our very last report about 2 months ago. It was middle of May of this year about where BPD is on the arc of compliance. We'll publish another one later this year. And in connection with those reports, we hold forums like this. We have public hearings with the court. And as you know, Wanda, we issue one-page summaries, essentially, in connection with each of those semi-annual reports, where we give just a bullet-pointed synopsis or bullet-pointed overview of where BPD finds itself, in our view, along the arc of compliance. And so, you know, we give those reports regularly. I'm not sure if the question is sort of aimed at, you know, are we going to have, you know, some big public forum? But we have public forums every quarter.
Right.
educate the people, to educate the community on where things are. This is what we're doing tonight. So I'm not sure exactly what the question is directed at, but we do inform the community in a number of ways on a consistent basis. And we're required to do this by the consent decree about where BPD is along the path of reform.
And then at the same time, you're available to come out to the community meetings.
Exactly.
Exactly. Mhm.
I was about to say, Wanda, where we are now, depending on COVID, because pre-COVID, many of us were, we would go out to community meetings at the community's request, and we intend to do that once it's safe to do so. But Seth is absolutely right. I mean, we publish the semi-annual reports. We publish a lot of reports, and we have the quarterly forums, we have the hearings, and so. There's a lot going on. We do what we can to get the information out to the community. We have a website, folks can look on there. And of course, if you have questions, you can always ask one of the neighborhood liaisons that Miller leads, or you can send questions to the monitoring team. And we generally try to give you an answer within, I think it's 48 hours, Seth, if I'm not mistaken.
All right. Any other questions, Miller?
I don't. I think if we could spend a couple minutes just talking about Thursday's hearing, as was mentioned, there are quarterly hearings with the court. And are those hearings that are good for the public to attend? They are open to the public. I want to just remind everyone about that. But in the opinion of the panel, is there a lot of good information that the public could glean from those hearings?
I'll start, and the answer is absolutely. Whoever attends the public hearing, and if folks during COVID were watching I guess it was Zoomed. I mean, you got a feel for what was going on. But basically, what happens? I mean, this is a judicial hearing where the judge presides. The parties present. That means the city tells the court and the public who's present in the courtroom exactly what they've done over a particular period of time. The Department of Justice will give its side and tell whether they agree with the city or disagree with the city, or what improvements they think need to be made. And the monitoring team will then pitch in at the end to evaluate where the city is, where BPD is. And one of the most important things I think we get out of this is the judge typically gives a very comprehensive opening statement where he sees and he tells the parties where he thinks things are, and he levels his criticism where appropriate. He praises where appropriate, but it's a full-scale, all-day hearing, and there's a lot of information that's disseminated in that particular hearing. And I think anybody who has the time should do their best to come down and at least see part of it, and especially the early part when the judge gives his opening statement. I would hope that you would stay around for the whole day, because the monitoring team really doesn't get to present until the end of the day. And our experience has been, most people have left by then. But either way, I mean, I think it is clearly a very valuable exercise. You learn a lot. There's a lot of information being disseminated, and hopefully, more people will participate.
Ms. Wanda, did you have any other
No,
questions?
I don't have any more questions. I think we've been pretty thorough this evening on the areas that I had concerns about, and that people have talked to me about. The only other thing is about child abuse policy. I did have a question from the community about how that's being handled as far as the reporting pieces, because what I heard was that they're not, if a family reports someone, they had to wait for 24 hours, and then they didn't know if a report was actually filed. And this was from someone with the Missing Children's Network. Does anybody know anything about?
I don't know, Seth, you were talking.
I'm sorry, Wanda, I don't know the direct answer to that question. I can tell you that the child abuse policy is undergoing revision right now.
Okay.
But what that specific policy provision you've mentioned about sort of holding off on reports when reported by, when reported by a family member, I'm just not sure what what's going on with that.
Okay, well, I was thinking that probably with the installation of the new system, then a person would know if a report had actually been filed, because they should be receiving file number or, report number. So they don't have to keep following up with the police department to see whether or not that's happening.
I mean, I think that should already be, oh, go ahead, Chair. I think that should already be happening. They should already be receiving a complaint number if they want one, but go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, what I was going to say is depending on the age of the child, and if you've got a tender age child under the age of 13, you don't wait 24 hours to take that report. If you're talking about an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, or an adult, it's not written in stone, but yeah, usually there is a 24-hour period if they're an adult, unless you suspect some foul play or something like that. A person's mentally incapacitated. I mean, there are certain things that if present, you would take the report immediately, but when you say child, if you're talking about small children, there is no 24-hour wait.
Okay. Okay, this came from someone who's with the Missing and Exploited Children's Network here in Baltimore City, because there appears to be a underground problem that we're just trying to get our fingers around.
Yeah, it depends on the age of the child. And again, every time, when I hear people talk about child, we all, depending on our own ages, I guess, we kind of define what that is, right? But when you're talking about, a small child, then no, there's no waiting period for that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I will report that to her. And that's basically all I had. Miller, is there, let's see, something else? We went through the misconduct and discipline. We've talked about the sexual assault policies and community engagement, which is what we're doing now. That's why we're all sitting here now. This is the communication, the type of community engagement that we have been able to do because of COVID. We were able to do this all through last year, 2020. And we will continue to do this, as well as, like, I had Seth on Anthony McCarthy's radio show today on WEAA. That's another means of community engagement that we use. And then we also have all of the forums. And I'm hoping that people will start calling into the forums and listening to the dialogue that we have and asking us questions that will spark other questions, because there's a lot of misinformation out that we want to make sure that we dispel.
One of the things I'm going to add on is this, we talk about community policing, we talk about the community, and in order for this consent decree to have the success that we all hope it has, and I firmly believe that it will, we have to have community support and community input. And the community really is going to have to be just as involved as we are, because, we are a small team. I mean, we have 20 folks, and there's no way 20 people are going to be able to be in every little precinct 24/7. Right. So community are the ones that are going to have to, if you see something, say something. I mean, that phrase is kind of corny, but we mean it, because if you see a police officer misbehaving, or if you see a police officer behaving in a nice way, I mean, it's nice to say good things about them as well. But, if you see something in the community, you need to report it. And with the way that the system is now set up, it's designed to give you a safe forum. I mean, you can file reports anonymously. You don't have to give your name. You don't have to sign anything. You can simply, you can go to a precinct. You can look online. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that you can file complaints if you see something that's going on. But you need to take advantage of that, because the monitoring team can only be helpful if we know about it. And so it's incredibly important that folks in the community, when they see things, as I said, they need to report it. But I'm also encouraging you to, when you see good things, to report that as well, because a lot of these men and women who are out here who, they take their lives in their hands every day. Most of them want to do a good job. And when they do a good job, someone should give them credit for it. So I think it cuts both ways.
Right. And I had an opportunity to look at BPD's website. They have revamped their website and rebranded it, and it is so accessible. It is unbelievable. You can actually go to their website and give a report, and you don't have to, like you said, it's anonymous. And you can also find the policies there that we need public comment on. And it's much easier now to find those. They have a little button there where you just push that. You don't have to search through like we did before. And I think we're coming up on the end of our hour. And I think we've had a great conversation. We've covered just about everything that I know that I wanted to bring out tonight. So any last words as we close, gentlemen?
I want to thank everyone for participating.
Oh, thanks. Anything else, Seth, you want to say, Chuck?
No, again, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Wanda, for facilitating this discussion so ably. Thank you very much for that.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I love talking.
You're good at it.
Okay, so we are coming up on our last couple of seconds. Miller, thank you again, as usual. And Miss Jessica, who is our tech person who you never get to see, she's the one that keeps us on our toes. And I want to say thank you, Jessica. We appreciate you. And I guess we're going to be out in any second.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.